Get in, nerds, we're talking about Bloomburrow. There it is. Alright, so, about a week ago I posted my first video giving my thoughts on Bloomburrow Draft. This was before the set came out, and obviously a lot of it was based off of my own experience with the game and how I've seen similar things in the past. Because of this, I got some things wrong, but I also got a lot of things right, and my first 3 drafts on day 1 were 7-2, 6-3, and 7-2. So let's set the record straight and talk about the 3 things I got wrong, and also the 3 things I got right about Bloomburrow Draft. Starting with what I got wrong, let's talk about Gift. When I made that video, I really wanted the video to be my first thoughts and didn't want to bog it down with minute details about every single card in the set. Because of this, I said, none of them are worth it, unless the added effect will quickly finish the game so the advantage doesn't really matter. I'll start by saying I have gifted very little personally, but I should do my due diligence and tell you that there will be some cards in some situations where gifting is just the right play. I can't exactly make a list because every situation will just be different, but here are some cards that either I have cast or my opponent has cast against me and I didn't immediately cringe. Consumed by Greed, Crumb and Get It, Nocturnal Hunger, Parting Gust, and Scrap Shooter. After playing with these cards, I'm still a little cautious, but Wizards definitely made sure that giving your opponent something like a card usually gives you a card's worth of effect if you play it right, so I'm actually happy it's working out. However, one thing I did get right is that elementals are strong. Some are definitely more strong than others, but I have rarely felt behind when casting one. Many people will say that this was kind of obvious, but I say to them, wow, you must be really great at parties. The main reason I made such a big deal about this was because early discussion about the set was talking about the tribal aspect of the set. I had some friends tell me that before my video, they didn't even read the elementals because they noticed the creature type didn't go in any deck. Their abilities are just so good by themselves that if you first pick one, they're probably going to go in most of your decks. I'm really glad that I brought attention to this early. The next thing I was really wrong about was red being the best color in the format. After playing games, asking around, and looking at data, I have found that green is the color with all the best decks. Hilariously, I still have not drafted a rabbit deck, and that has made me very cautious from the beginning. I knew when I made the tier list that it was definitely not going to sit in the D tier, but everybody keeps talking this deck up so high that I feel like I just have to put it in an S. I may not have experience with it, but I mean, everyone on the internet can't be wrong, right? Yeah, right. Hilariously, when it comes to mice, I said, red-white mice are going to be the decider on whether this format is going to be fast or ridiculously fast. The only real question is whether they'll be able to squeak in the last bit of damage once the late game hits and everyone starts playing 4/5s. And I was accurate, but more in the second part. If this deck pops off, then you have to build around defending against it. And I think Wizards built the format so that some decks could fight against it. There is a ton of life gain, 4 toughness creatures, decent amount of removal, all throughout the set. So I'm moving mice all the way down to C tier. They can still have an amazing start, but if an opponent can stabilize, mice can't really break through like rabbits and lizards can. Speaking of lizards, we're going to move them down just 1 tier to A tier. Mid-range is king in this set, and lizards can fizzle out just like mice. But the removal and out of combat damage makes them a bit better in my opinion. Now let's talk about frogs and squirrels. I placed them both in B tier because if the format was too fast, their synergies would easily be broken apart. However, I did know that they would be strong contenders, so I kinda put them in the middle of the road, but I really had to have some convincing just to see how strong they were. Since the format is slightly slower than initially thought, these decks eke out so much advantage that they really can't be stopped in the endgame. That being said, I put squirrels above frogs, as frogs get very minimal help from blue. They basically always rely on their green cards, meaning it's going to be harder to find a good frog deck than it is a good squirrel deck. S tier and A tier. Bats I moved up to A tier more based on my opponents than me. I just have had a hard time drafting white in this set. But bats have been the most annoying deck to fight against, and really capitalize on the slower green decks. That 2/4 flyer is a house, and I can never seem to kill it. A tier. Now for all the blue decks. I pretty much thought blue was bad, but I was really surprised at how bad the otters were week 1. Red and blue just get bricked by green's creatures. They go all the way down to D tier, and birds stay in C. Rats, however, I'm happy to say go up to B tier. This comes up on a later point, but I can promise you I think there is something there with blue-black. So yeah, the age of green is here for now. I'm sure as more people draft green and decks get worse, blue will be more playable, but I'm gonna have to see that happen first before I jump the gun. We talked a lot about speed, and although I agree that the format has slowed down a little bit, do not, and I repeat, do not, get complacent. You still need defense if you want to play the long game. 2 drops, removal, life gain, and high toughness. Anything to make sure you don't die on turn 4 to an aggressive start. If you're a fast deck, you want to be deadly fast, playing a low curve and using synergy to get that final bit of damage in. But a lot of times, all that effort just gets bricked by a 4-5, or even a 2-4. Not much to say, really. This format is fast, but it's more accurate to say it's decided fast. Games may go long, but if a mouse deck hasn't killed a squirrel deck by turn 8, they're probably not going to win. And lastly, my biggest mistake is also my best prediction of the format.
Bloomburrow is not a tribal set.
Yes. Let me explain. You see, I'm a bit old school, and I follow the philosophy that rares are not as important to talk about because you rarely see the same ones and most of them are pretty straightforward. You don't really need to think about the strategy or how to build around them. Because of this, I only studied the commons and uncommons for the crash course. I believe if you know how those work, you can just read a card like Oliver and know that it goes good in a rabbit deck. But a card like Carrot Cake might be harder to understand its place in the format, because spoiler alert, it's good in decks other than rabbits. So I looked at all the lower rarity cards and thought, I don't see a lot of tribal synergy here, therefore, hot take, it's not a thing! I was technically right, but only if I look at the commons and uncommons. If you look at the rares, many of them are very tribal in nature, and ask you to build around them when drafting. And since rares appear more often thanks to play boosters, this can happen pretty frequently. So I was wrong, actually? I think this idea is best described by the Blue-Black Rats deck. A deck I saw as both aggro and control, well that's because it is. And that's not a bad thing, it's intended. You see, there are some amazing cards that really reward you for playing nothing but rats, but you can also just take control elements in both blue and black and make an amazing control deck. I was actually able to draft a control deck and went 6-3. By the way, like the video if you want to see that draft in the future. So what this means is there are actually somewhere between 10 and 20 decks in the format. 10 decks that rely on tribal synergies, which usually happens when you build around a good rare, and some decks built around powerful uncommons that rely on card mechanic synergies more than just creature type. And there you have it. Before you go, just know that I am working really hard on a draft video currently. It's going to be the same highly edited, fast style as the crash course, which takes a lot of time to make. So I made this video with as little editing as possible to let you guys know that I'm working hard and I got some great stuff in the works. It's just going to take some time. Subscribing and clicking the bell for notifications is honestly the best way right now to know when I post stuff, as I can't really get stuff out on a regular schedule right now. Now, with all that boring stuff out of the way, why don't you watch this video here, as I go over the most important commons and uncommons in each color.
Oh, and here's some links so I don't get sued.
Later, nerds!